And I think we're live. It's possible we're live. Maybe we're live. No, I'm pretty sure we are.
Yeah, it says
oh my god. Guys, our audio is awful. Okay.
What
we're just gonna do? I don't know, cry. We're just gonna keep going. Hi. Welcome to Suicide and Stuff.
Do you have a picture? This is Suicide and Stuff.
What's happening?
We're going to talk about autism. So, still?
Oh man. I don't know, guys. This is very techie bad.
Yeah, I'm not sure what's going on. Oh.
I'm not either. I can see both of you. I can hear both of you, but I do think that the issue is me.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
All right, let's keep going. We're here. We're rolling. We're fucking it all up.
Okay. All right.
Okay, Jess, do we have a rating?
We do have a rating.
It's R. Why?
It's R. Bad words.
Bad words.
But even if we're really sick, we're going to say words. I mean, not everybody's sick. Is everybody sick or is it just me? No, I am sick.
I don't know. I stay sick, man.
Yeah, I think that was a choice you made when you decided to have kids.
I'm having a hard time understanding. My audio is fucked.
No. Okay. Well, we will over from here and see if Des can hear us eventually, or if anyone online can. So I am Jess, and I work at Rockland Crisis in Colorado, and we answer the statewide peer support and crisis lines. I also do general rabble-rousing around suicidology. Really excited to be here with Des and with Joelle. I'll let Des go next. Des, can you hear me?
Yes, it's getting better. Hi, I'm Dese'Rae L. I run and live through this, which is a series of true stories of suicide attempt survivors across the United States. And I'm running tech, so I'm,
She's troubleshooting whatever is happening right now. Joelle, do you want to introduce yourself?
Okay. I would love to. Hi, my name is Joelle Marie Nourse. By training, I am a peer specialist. I was trained in Massachusetts. I now live in Los Angeles. I am autistic. I have OCD. And in other ways, I am definitely disabled. And so I focus around really accessibility and agency, voice, and choice for all of the above and for pretty much everybody, addressing any kind of barriers. So disability doesn't mean that you identify necessarily as disabled. It means that there are barriers disabling you. For me, that's how I go for it.
Yeah, I feel like that's the way I like to think about disability as well. So we're going to talk about primarily suicide and autism, and then just I think some things about disability and access in general today. So Joelle, do you want to start out by just giving us some overview, introduction things about suicide and autism?
Sure. So there's a lot of issues that kind of go into factored into suicide and autism, and one of them is definitely self-identification and self-expression, being able to not mask oneself. And in the past several years, there's definitely actually been research on the internal experience of autistics, which is like a new and novel idea, apparently. So it's definitely been showing that there is a very high rate of suicide attempts, suicidal ideation, and completed suicides in autistics. And, often when I bring this up, So often the response for people who are not empathetic or compassionate is that I am serving myself as a high functioning autistic, and I'm not talking about other people who are considered low functioning, and I can talk about that word later. But really, this affects everyone on the spectrum. So everyone on the spectrum has an increased risk of suicide. Everyone on the spectrum, no matter where you are on the spectrum, quote unquote, you have an increased risk of, having suicidal thoughts, of having PTSD for various complicated reasons. So a lot of it has to do with taking away people's agency and ability to be themselves and embrace who they are rather than cover it up. And it's really important to me because, I wasn't actually officially diagnosed until I was about 19.
Wow.
And before that, I was, I had ADHD or depression or bipolar and ADHD. And I'd had numerous neuropsych tests. There were a lot of signs, there were a lot of developmental issues, but a lot of my needs were pretty much ignored, and it's definitely affected me to this day.
Yeah, I think the social model of disability has been really critical for me in thinking about disability and suicide, and really just in thinking about suicide as this sort of shift away from medicalized models has been really helpful in just thinking through, having a framework to think through ways to think about suicide and ways to think about disability.
Yeah, sorry, it's a little off-putting. So I can only see Des, I can't see Jess, just so everybody knows. So it's a little off-putting. Like I'm trying to figure out when to talk and when not to talk.
Sorry.
So in terms of the social model of disability, a lot, Des is just cracking up apparently. A lot of that can be a very complicated issue, and that definitely ties into issues with suicide in the autistic community, because it tends to be, if you're asking for support, people will label you as broken or there's something wrong with you. But people who are quote unquote normal, the average person, ask for support all the time. So that doesn't mean you're broken. It just means you know what your strengths are and where you could use more support. And so it's frustrating to say, I have a disability, it's autism, and I'm disabled by society, by the world around me, for having lack of accommodation and acceptance for a lot of people who have different needs. And then have people come back at me and say, well, that means you're broken. And that contributes a lot to internal distress.
And I feel like those are things that happen institutionally in a bunch of different places. So I think in medical systems and in educational settings were two of the kind of big places that you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, sorry, I'm having a hard time. This is very difficult for me, not being able to see one of you.
I'm sorry. I don't know why it's like that.
No, it's okay. It's why I'm like, my train of thought is a little, yeah. Okay. So definitely, there's medicalized trauma that tends to happen to a lot of autistic people, and a lot of people who identify as disabled in general, but specifically for autistics, there's a lot of issues that are neurological, and it's ultimately a neurodevelopmental issue. So, but people tend to forget that. So there's issues with feeling pain and identifying pain, feeling emotions, identifying emotions, not having a hard time describing the physical sensations you're having. So, if you go to a doctor and you say, like, I'm in incredible pain, and then you have a hard time telling them where it is or where it's coming from, it's called deferred pain, or issues with interoception, what's going on inside. And so, doing this, if you're already not tending to do the typical correct socially acceptable things like make eye contact or or speak at the appropriate time, whatever, doctors look at you weird. And by weird, I mean they look at you skeptically, like, are you really in pain? Why are you actually here? And when that happens over and over again, you start to add on, like, you don't know who to trust, and there are things wrong with me. I'm always in the wrong. And you defer again to people who are telling you what you're feeling. And that can lead to a whole lot of physical problems, because eventually you tend to just overlook things. And I'm speaking from personal experience, but this is also, the having a not clear understanding of your body and how it's feeling, and then not being able to express that accurately leads to a lot of distrust and a lot of manipulation and, like, honestly, verbal abuse from providers. And a lot of autistics have experienced that.
So
Wow.
I feel like from my perspective, it sounds like there's kind of a couple of things going on. One is there's this epistemic injustice, which is like your credibility as a knower of what's going on with you, of your experiences, is being doubted because the way you communicate about or experience things is different than what medical providers are expecting. And then as a further complication of that is other abuses that happen. So it starts with that space of epidemic injustice. It's on from there.
Yeah, definitely. And that definitely happened in school as well. I would get in trouble for not really understanding what was going on. And once that started, when I was younger, in second or third grade, once that started, where I wouldn't quite understand what was going on, I already had anxiety because I knew I didn't always know what was up. Once the assumption started that I was purposely misbehaving, it carried on because I was a bad kid.
Yeah.
And then, stuff like when I was in third grade, I was still peeing my pants because the interoception thing, I didn't understand what was going on. So I would pee my pants in class. And I not understand I had to go to the bathroom until right before I had to. And teachers didn't believe me that, I need to go now. And so there were a few times where teachers would make me sit and I'd pee my pants because they wouldn't let me go. And that was my fault. That wasn't like a kid told you they needed to go and you didn't listen to them. And these things add up. And that turns into quote unquote acting out because of this isn't working, maybe I need to do this. No, that's wrong also. So, you end up in this just cycle of being a bad kid because you don't really understand what's going on. And you figured out if you ask what's going on at this point, you're also being bad somehow. Yeah.
Right. So it's like a setup.
Absolutely.
And I feel like it should be obvious, but let's make the connection to suicide. How does that stuff all contribute to suicidal thoughts for people?
So I mean, when I was around 6, I was already kind of thinking I would like to die. At 6, it wasn't quite, I would like to make that happen, but it was could that maybe happen? And a lot of it was because I didn't have frustration tolerance, which is very hard for autistics to manage, because when you get frustrated, it's a very physical experience, and you can try as hard as you want to not have that thing we call a meltdown, but eventually it's just out of your control, and that makes you feel helpless, and then people are getting mad at you, so you just feel bad. You feel like you're a bad kid. You feel like you're a bad kid for having feelings. You feel like you're a bad kid for things you can't control. And so there were definitely times I wanted to disappear, I wanted to be hit by a truck. And then, as that builds up, as I get older, I find more and more things I'm doing wrong and less empathy and compassion to navigate that, and less explicit help to navigate that. And I think, also because of what we used to think autism is and what we're now realizing autism actually is, I think about whether or not I could have been identified as autistic or not, and I don't know if that would have helped. But as it was, I was seen as an explosive kid who didn't behave. That made me feel really bad. I wanted to be a good kid. That made me want to disappear. I felt alienated much of the time. I felt like I couldn't communicate what I wanted to do, and I was being told what I was trying to communicate or what I was trying to do. And all of that makes you think there's something inherently just wrong with me existing. So,
tell us about the autism community. Like, what are you referring to when you talk about the autism community?
So the autism community is, a lot of people, when they think of the autism community, like outside of the autistic community, who are outside of it, they think of everyone involved. They think of the parents, the caretakers, the siblings, the autistics, and that's not, it's not empowering at all. And what happens is there's this very strange kind of enmeshment that happens where we in general think of parent and sibling experiences and needs as the same as the person who's autistic, and they're definitely not.
Yeah.
And often, parents who most of them are just trying to do the best they can. They kind of forget that there is an individual here who, whether or not they're communicating outright in complete sentences, vocally, they still have wants and needs that you might not understand because there's a whole internal experience. So that's what a lot of people consider to be the autistic community, and I disagree that that is accurate. The autistic community should be autistics only, because what's happening now is that adult autistics who have finally realized that they are autistic and they found community and companionship in other autistics, they're now being told by parents of 5-year-olds, who obviously look very different than a 30 or 40-year-old. They're now being told they're not autistic, that they're, taking away rights of more low functioning autistics, and it makes it, it can almost make it an incredibly violent community to be a part of sometimes, like just emotionally. So there's a tendency to just put everybody's needs and viewpoints together, and it's extremely disheartening and it's extremely distressful. And there's not a lot of understanding that a 5-year-old does not look like a 30-year-old or a 40-year-old, and there's a lot of damage being done.
So what happens when you?
I'm still put off by only being able to see one of you. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. So what happens when you when you point that out within the autism community, as it were? Like how do siblings and parents respond?
So I think there's definitely two reactions, and one of them, well, first of all, I have, when there was a presentation last year at AAS on autism and suicide, it came up like what might be the factors. And first of all, people in the audience, a couple of people just denied that was happening, which was very strange. That there were high risks of suicide for people on the spectrum, and I felt that was very bizarre. And then there were a couple conversations about how ABA could be a contributor. And when me and another person who sort of identifies as on the spectrum said, well, ABA does contribute to PTSD, to a lot of trauma, to kids having to mask and then carrying on that burden into their lives and feeling alienated and separated. And basically now they're reporting they're having trauma. There was a lot of pushback, and definitely somebody turned around and said ABA is the only evidence-based therapy for autism. At a presentation
Just
on
so you
autism
know,
and suicide,
Jess is rolling her eyes.
Where autistics are talking. And so that's, that's definitely an issue, and that's one of the many issues, one of the many reasons why we can't be like, yes, the autism community is everyone, because it's just not. Sometimes, family members and parents, et cetera, will be happy that I'm willing to talk so in depth about my personal internal experience, because it's not easy. It's hard. It's not like I'm like, hey, I'm autistic and this is all the hard shit that I go through and these are all the intimate feelings I have around my autism. And let me do that because it's fun. It's like a good time. No, like really, when I write things that are very specific about my internal experiences related to my autism and all the neurological, sensory, social bullshit, it's because I know that there are parents who want to know what's going on with their kids. Mm. There are partners who like maybe are having some communication issues. There are people who aren't sure what's going on with them. And I think as much as we can share these things that are internal, we can have a better understanding and a better conversation. So there are some parents and caregivers and siblings, et cetera, that are just like really happy I'm doing that. But there's also a lot that are like, basically, shut the fuck up, find something else to be special about. And it's like, okay. I'm like, I don't know that I need to go through every detail of difficulty in my life to be able to be acknowledged as having like some challenges. And the idea that I do is ridiculous. And the idea that ultimately I really say, like, your 5-year-old is not going to look like me. I'm 37. Mm-hmm. Like, that's just not going to happen. And it's a developmental issue. So the timeline is different. We don't know what people can do or can't do. What are you giggling at? We don't know what people can do or can't do. And,
yeah.
And I still get pushed back. And that frustrates me even more because it's parents, when they're so angry at me for saying maybe I have something in common with your kid, with their internal experience at least. Mm-hmm. There's such a sense of denial that their kid could be a person. Like,
right.
Could deserve agency, could deserve choice. And that's really what I see. And it's just so frustrating. Not to mention it's like personally distressful a lot when I get like attacked for just saying like, there's other ways to communicate other than speaking. Like,
right.
Maybe they're not feeling like that. Maybe your kid is flipping out because their clothes are uncomfortable. Check that out. Like, So just being involved and being vocal can be extremely distressful.
Right.
Yeah. I think I can see some like similarities too with the like friends and family oriented work in sometimes in suicide prevention, and then also in like mental health in general. So like organizations like NAMI and places like that have really, really supported family members and sometimes elevated their experiences over the experiences of people who are like having whatever the concerns are happen. So I feel like this kind of comes up in a lot of spaces, but there's so much intensity in it around autism. It's like this space where there's sort of always already an assumption that people shouldn't have agency.
Right.
And I feel like it's obvious how that contributes to people considering suicide. That like when you take away people's choices, like when people feel trapped, suicide becomes an option for them.
I actually, I was able to talk to a class a couple weeks ago, basically just about my experience, about a little bit about suicide and autism and things like that. And I realized, like, in that setting, I could actually talk about how I was as a kid versus how I am now, like, presenting. Mm-hmm. And that actually made a difference. I got no pushback. I got, like, a lot of people just asking, what can we do with kids we work with? What can we do in this situation? Like, what's the best way if somebody's not communicating verbally? How can I offer them a choice? Things like that. And they wanted to know instead of telling me, like, you don't count. So, but I think it's just awful how not just autistics, but all of us have to like justify what we're reporting as our experience, and not just in day to day. Like definitely when we're trying to get support, when we're trying to get medical help, when we're trying to get accommodations for education, things like that. Like we have to justify existence and how we experience it, and give people intimate details of our lives, and it's degrading and it's dehumanizing, and that definitely contributes too.
Yeah. We actually have kind of a question on that topic, going back to when you were a kid. Grace Durbin wants to know, what were some of the ways you tried to communicate those feelings when you were younger but didn't know how? She sent that a while back, but now we've circled around again.
Like when I was frustrated. Well, I think when I was like 5 or 6, I would just get really upset. And I think for me, I just did the best I could, but like literally my frustration tolerance was just like nothing. And it wasn't until I was like 27, 28 that I had a reasonable frustration tolerance. Like I still have meltdowns. I mean, that's not fun. Like nobody wants to have a meltdown. Nobody wants that. Nobody wants it. But like, and I didn't see kids around me having the kinds of melt tantrums that I was having. Like I would like get in trouble for something, and usually my first response would be like, I was confused so often. Like I was no angel. Like I did shit I shouldn't have done, and I got in trouble because I was a little kid. But there were so many times when like I just didn't really understand, because I didn't even understand the premise of why I was in trouble in the first place. And then like trying to explain always seemed like, I think at a certain point, that I was just trying to deny that I did anything wrong. And it's just like, I just want to understand. And all the frustration came on top of me. Like I would have screaming fits. I would pass out. I'd break some of my toys. And I had no idea how to handle these things I was feeling. And it felt like my body was not mine. Like, and it was exhausting and scary. But how was I trying to communicate feelings? I don't know. How does a 6-year-old communicate feelings?
Right.
I just had much less time to do it.
Right.
Yeah, I feel like I communicated a lot by like screaming and crying at that age. So, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, let's be real. Sometimes I still communicate a lot that way.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I cry like 100 times a week. So, as we all know.
I miss when you kept lists.
So I'm trying to keep us on track on our list, but there's so many things I want to talk about and ask you about. Is it okay if we talk about ABA now? Should we do the beef corner sign first and then start ABA?
I think it would make sense to do ABA in the section after the beef corner, because I think that stuff goes together.
Okay, perfect.
Let's do strategizing. Okay, beef corner it is.
This is very weird because I can't see myself, and I'm just like, feel like I'm in a void.
Oh, I'm really sorry that things are so weird.
Me too.
That could be one of your beefs.
That can be one of your beefs. We're gonna have to do this again. Like we're gonna have to have a part 2. So.
Yeah, part 2.
I mean, I could talk to fucking Joelle for hours anyway, so whatever.
That's nice to hear, because I will go on for hours if you let me.
Oh yeah, me too. I never. Joelle, why don't you start off the beefs?
Oh, okay. Well, actually, ABA goes great here too. One of my biggest fucking things with people saying ABA is an evidence-based therapy is that, yeah, it fucking is. But like, you want to change how a kid acts? Yes, please train them to do that. I don't ever argue that it doesn't have some success in that way, but the ultimate argument is that it is completely damaging to people. It gives people PTSD. It makes people comply no matter what. Now, if you have a 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old who is taught they cannot say no to adults, is that setting them up for safety?
Nope.
No, it's not. And if they're already having communication issues, if they're already having issues where they're not understanding to a degree socialization at their age level, and we're telling kids you cannot say no, that is incredibly fucking alarming just there. So the evidence is there that you can, depending on what's going on with a kid, what their needs are, how they express, what their social supports are, just a million different factors. Okay, so to some degree, ABA will do what it says it does. Yeah, but we are literally driving people to kill themselves. And I'm not going to fucking mince words about it. So evidence doesn't prove that, like I constantly get that ABA is evidence when we're telling people it causes PTSD. It can do both things. Like, you can make somebody behave a certain way and cause them trauma. Like, I don't understand why that's hard to connect, but apparently it fucking is.
Joelle, do you know about Ivar Lomas?
Yeah.
That he also created conversion therapy?
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's, yeah, so...
Good.
So many levels of fuckery.
So, I mean, well, here's the thing. ABA is sometimes court-ordered.
No,
And,
that's not okay.
There's this big fucking movement, like, I'm not criticizing getting rid of conversion therapy because it's fucking awful, but I am criticizing people who are like, oh my God, conversion therapy, so dehumanizing, such torture. But hey, that kid needs ABA for 40 hours a week.
Right.
No. And for people who don't know, Ivar Lomas basically used a lot of the same principles for conversion therapy and for ABA. Like, he's like, oh, works on one, should work on the other. And if you look in his book, it's called The Me. I can't think of it right now because I'm like all fired up. But if you look at basically his original like ABA instruction manual, there are headings for chapters that are like physical punishment. How can you be a parent and think like this is okay?
Yeah.
And I get like a lot of parents aren't sold on the titles of what went on in that instruction manual.
Mm-hmm.
But you have a lot of adult autistics telling you that they were traumatized by this protocol. And you're saying, oh, but my kid calls me mom now.
Yeah. Well, yeah, there's so many things about ABA. And yeah, like I feel like ABA is all built around this idea of like, how do we get people to like mask well enough that their like family members in society like them more or something, which is really, really deeply fucked up, but also something that comes up, I think, in a lot of behavior therapies, which makes me very skeptical of behavior therapy in general. And I think it's really important that we like not, oftentimes when a therapy or something has evolved from something that was really shitty, people will like make the argument that like, well, it was shitty before, but like now it's better. And it's like, no, it's still built on that shitty foundation. And you don't get to just like excuse it because like, I don't even know what the excuse would be. But like, oh, we took out the physical abuse part. It's like, okay. So you're just using the emotional.
Now we only withhold food. I mean, and I know this is supposed to be like beef quarter, and I'm like going all over the place, but like something that the problem with ABA is like you can't inflict ABA on somebody. You cannot engage somebody in ABA like willingly. You can't describe to them what's going to happen and then do it.
Mm-hmm.
So like there are some people who are autistic that I have run into on Twitter who say they are autistic, they went through ABA as a kid, they are better for it. Fine. That's your shit, not my shit. And like, but the thing is that we can't force kids to go through this. And there is no way to voluntarily have kids submit to ABA because that's not ABA.
So it's like automatically defying consent.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So, okay. Other beefs. We've got more. Tell me more.
Who's next?
I have a beef about my shitty body and I hate my mortal coil.
Okay.
Always. I mean, just chronically. Like now I'm sick and I'm like, what the
Voluntarily
fuck? I don't have coronavirus. I found out, so
because
that's cool.
that's not, yeah.
But,
Yeah, I mean, at least someone found a test to test you for coronavirus. Like there was a test that was found.
That's cool. My body is still shitty though.
Well.
Yeah, like all of it's broken and I hate it. It's a trap and just trying to be a ghost, okay?
Well, you look like a ghost. You're pretty pale this evening.
Yeah, that's probably from the flu. This like flu-like pallor. Also like doing work inside of systems, while it's like good and it helps people and it moves things in a direction and stuff, that's great. It's so fucking hard sometimes.
Yeah.
My beefs. Like, yeah, just like trying to work within systems that are like actively discriminating against my people. Boo. It's hard. I hate it. Between that and my shitty body, it's all traps everywhere.
Booby traps.
Anybody else got some beefs?
I don't even know how to bring up my beef because it requires like this fucking backstory. So that article that came out in USA Today last week or 2 weeks ago or whatever the fuck it was about, well, there were two articles. One was like, why aren't therapists trained to deal with suicide stuff? And the other one was like, how to find a therapist that doesn't fucking suck. And I was quoted in the second one. And, it turns out like, I think the nuance was left out of my quote or it was cut short or I can't remember. But the gist of the quote was like, don't disclose to your therapist. And more what the meaning was like, don't disclose right away if you don't know your therapist's approach to suicide. And one of our glorious colleagues got on Twitter and decided that it was a good idea to subtweet me and talk shit about me and all the other people who were quoted in this article and say that we were harmful without giving us an opportunity to respond. Because we were subtweeted. And by that, I mean there were no names named. And personally, I do all of my work out in the open. So, like, name me. Like, call me out. Ask me the question. Ask me for clarity. Don't tell me I'm harmful without, giving me the opportunity. So, I don't know. There was just, like, fucking an entire day's worth of being told, how awful what we had said was, when it's more like there was a little defensiveness coming through, and not actual useful critical thought. You jumped in on that, Jess.
Yeah, well, like the real fuckery to me was that it was like, oh hey, like what about all these great clinicians? And I was like, don't come at us with the not all men bullshit. Like in a new space. Don't repackage that argument. You know how that went. That didn't go well. Like you sounded like an asshole when you did it then. You sounded like an asshole. I don't know if this person did it then, but some other people did. So, like just like what? Like, oh, this article didn't mention that there's great clinicians out there. And I'm like, every other article acts like all the help that's out there is excellent. So,
yeah.
The way off.
Every article acts like that's the only fucking answer, and it's like, all right, but what's the reality here? Like, we're basically sending people off into the clinical world to get harmed if they don't know what questions to ask.
Right.
So my beef
Yeah, I
is with
feel
that.
Yeah, that's a good beef. I feel like I come to Beef Corner to get more beefs. Like, because I just jump on everybody's beef wagon.
Figure out what else.
Wagon. We need a GIF for that.
Anyway, Joelle, you got more beefs?
Do I have more beefs? I mean, yes.
Or would you
No,
rather
but I
move
mean,
on to other things?
no, it has to do with accessibility.
Oh, yeah, let's talk about that.
But in some ways, I think it's getting better, but it also just like sucks how bad it's been. Um, so I did put out a I guess like a survey for people who are interested in the Disability and Access Committee, which I am chair of. Apparently, it's a committee. It just needs to be like finalized. So, so I'm chair of the Disability and Access Committee. Everybody. So I put out the survey, and I'll put a link in the comments to it because I still want people to give me input, give me, what they think, basically. And part of it is asking for, what do you think priority should be? Like, you don't have to identify as disabled. Like, if you have barriers, if you have accessibility issues that you are like, what the hell is this? They should at least be brought up because they're probably affecting a bunch of other people. So anyway, so I in the survey I asked for comments, anything else, any concerns, whatever. There's at least one person who said that they can't attend the conferences at all. They can't and they can't be in any of the attend any of the webinars or anything because of accessibility issues. Last count, it was like about 30% of the comments mentioned hard of hearing, or deaf people, or needing captioning, things like that are just not available.
Yeah.
And
Guilty.
And so I'll get to that in a second because like there's a lot of nuance to that, especially when we are captioning costs money.
Mm-hmm.
It costs a lot of money, and it's kind of, it sucks that it is not that just accessibility is not prioritized in general in the world. And because of that, people who are already strapped for cash or strapped for personal resources, energy, brain functioning, have to also try and do this and reach out. And we're trying to make things accessible for each other, but it's like I can't always do it, and that's reasonable. It's reasonable to say, I'm trying to do this. Who's going to help me do it? But as a larger organization, like some of the feedback I've been getting is nobody else has made this request. And I'm like, okay. Like when I talk about captioning requests, things like that, and I'm like, well, no wonder, like the bullshit you have to go through to get it. Like it should just be standard. I'm amazed it's not standard.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And there's basically like it's things are not physically set up to be accessible. The conference is hard for me to go to because of accessibility in general. And nobody gives a shit about deaf and hard of hearing. And I can't argue with all those. I can't. There's no way I can say, oh, those aren't true. They're absolutely true. And doing the survey, just freely letting people write whatever the fuck they want, actually supported all that.
Right.
So
I think I feel hard pressed to find spaces, even in like activist spaces where people are pretty aware of things where like we're really able to consistently like provide what people need, and be able to like afford to do things. So we end up doing a lot of like sometimes things that were supposed to be like a gathering to talk about something end up being like a gathering to figure out how to make a space accessible, which is like worthwhile to do, but it's really frustrating, I think.
Yeah.
And that's in spaces where people are like actively trying to make space that's accessible. I never stop talking about this book called Care Work right now. But there's like really, really great stuff about like how to do like disability justice work in there, and how to like include how like any other kind of justice work is not justice work unless it's also disability justice work. Like obviously our liberation is bound up in each other's liberation, right? But I think there's just really great models for how to do that in that book. And I feel like I have ideas about how to do that on a small scale. But on a large scale, it seems like it should be easier.
Right.
One would think.
Well, I mean, like accessibility should be a line item in a fucking budget for an event. Why isn't it? Why is it not? I don't understand that. Like, I don't accept any excuses for not making that a part of your budget from the outset. I just don't. We have money for fucking everything else. It should be a priority, and if it's a priority, it's in the budget.
Yep.
If it's not in the budget, you don't give a shit.
Yes, agree. So Lee, you have an example of a place that does this really well.
Yeah. I totally forgot. Okay, I think it's if you give me 1 second, I can actually look it up because I forgot. It's
Look it up. I'm interested.
Yeah. I think it is. Let me just make sure I have the right thing. I don't want to say that. Yeah, so the American Public Health Association, they have an annual conference, and it's really big. But so if you go to apha.org and you look at their annual meeting, they have an entire thing under annual meeting that's about accessibility, and it's like this huge document about everything from like the location of the meeting, where the sorry, my brain's going ahead of me. But yeah, so it's accessibility. It's based on, they tell you all the local taxi services that have accessible taxis, and they have specific sections: attendees who are blind, partially sighted, attendees who use wheelchairs or other mobility supports, attendees who are hard of hearing. They talk about accessible transportation and housing, and they also have presenter and exhibitor guidelines to make things as accessible as possible. So like if you're doing poster presentations, they have guidelines to make like a more accessible poster, like visually, and how to hang it or how to move it so that if somebody's in a wheelchair or, things like that. And guidelines for oral sessions, they actually give you examples of how to present a slide so that you can like integrate talking about the slide in general in a way that gives all the information on the slide to people who are blind or poorly or have poor sight. But it's not, so you're actually describing things, and they give examples of how to do that. They also have guidelines for exhibitors and meeting room setup and things like that. And it's just amazing. They even bring up, there's a section on chronic pain that says members with disabilities, including chronic pain, have indicated that in crowded locations and at other times, they experience unintended pushing or well-intended taps that have caused pain or caused them to lose their balance. Please be aware of this and be considered a well registry. Like the fact that they say that at all. Now this is a huge conference, but there's so many of these things that they do that, relatively speaking, aren't that high cost. You just have to care. So it's just, but I looked at their 2019 accessibility guide for apha.org and their annual meeting, and it's really great. It's extensive.
Wow.
They really put a lot of care into it.
Yeah, Creating Change also does some really great stuff around this. It's a big queer conference, and they've always done a pretty good job, but I feel like it's really sort of stepped up. I'm putting that in the comments too. They have stuff about like scent safer areas, how to approach someone with a service dog, not asking, not assuming that people want the help that you're offering, not like clumping in the middle of hallways. They have like programs in large print, electric scooters and wheelchairs, large print grids of the schedule, assisted listening devices, magnifiers, readers, and step stools, and ASL interpretation on all their sessions. And then they have a disability related track.
Yeah, that's great.
Also, yeah. And a hospitality suite, a disabled person's hospitality suite.
I've been to a couple really small events that had a hospitality suite for people who are, just have chronic pain. They're tired. They need a break. It had dim lights. It was soothing. It was comfortable. There were couches, whatever. And just that doesn't take a lot extra.
Right.
I mean, I think two other things about where are we in our outline, by the way?
We're right at the end. So it's like, what are the last things that you want to squeeze in?
Yeah. So I just think, models of disability, like I definitely think like looking into both the social model and the identity model and not forcing the medical model on people ultimately leads to better conversations. It leads to truly understanding what somebody's trying to tell you about their experience. And it means that over time, we have to do less and less startup or initial work to make things accessible. So if we're talking to somebody about how they're identifying their experience and they're identifying themselves, instead of saying, instead of trying to like label it for them, we're going to really be able to hear how they're experiencing the world and what is a barrier for them instead of what we think is a barrier for them. Mm-hmm. And that's going to be way more productive. Also, in terms of accessibility accommodations, I think there needs to be a change where people shouldn't have to go through hoops to like try and get accommodations or try and figure out if something is accessible. Things should be offered and people should be welcomed into spaces that are being made accessible for them. So the difference between that is like having to call the hotel and be like, hi, is your elevator this close to this thing? Mm-hmm. Or do you have an accessible bathroom in this area of the hotel? So not having to do that, but having that information just available because it makes sense, because need access should be the standard.
Yeah, definitely. Any other last couple of things you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, I think a lot of things around access, agency, voice, and choice come down to communication and whether we accept people as they're communicating or not, and if we accept what they're saying or if we assume they're saying something different than what they tell us. And I think ultimately we need to accept what people are saying to us, whether it's with words or whether they are attempting to communicate in a different way. And that can be hard to figure out, but we have to put work into it. We have to accept that people are communicating things to us, and we just need to believe people.
Yeah.
So hard to do.
For suicide prevention, like if you were going to give a couple of tasks to the suicidology world related to autism and suicide, what would those couple of things be that everyone should work on right now? I know that's the big ask right at the end.
We're going to have a Joelle part 2, so...
It's shit that I say all the time. Because I have to say that originally on the autism task sheet, whatever, that came out of AAS, Autism Speaks was a reference. No. So you need to be listening to people and what is traumatizing to them. Mm-hmm. You need to listen to people and how they identify themselves. And if you think you aren't sure, you ask. You take the step to go out and ask. You don't wait until people are like, well, this is wrong. And then you say, well, there's nothing we can do about it now. It's out there. No, fuck that. It just, no. You know, and believe people, bring people in.
Yeah, I feel like those are like really low bars that
Truly.
you're setting for us. Do you have a higher bar?
Well, they are low bars, and people don't fucking do them.
I know. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you're right. I'm just
So, okay, so specifically,
Yeah.
we need to be giving a shit about OCD. We need
Mhm.
to be giving a shit about autism. We need to listen to autistics who are not verbal and understand that there is multiple kinds of communication. So we need to actually be talking about these two things in terms of suicide, suicide prevention, and suicide risk. Last year at AAS, I'm pretty sure my panel was the only thing on OCD. I didn't see anything there this year on OCD, except for my talk, which is OCD and autism and peer support. And we need to consider peer support as legitimate for suicide prevention, for suicide support, and not be fucking scared that people can't handle it.
Right, because we already are, right? We are already handling these things.
Right, yeah. I mean, it's just, you know, when you're like, is there a final thought or a final ask? I'm like, this is the stuff I say all the time. So it's like, yeah.
Cool. So do you feel like the guide that AAS put out about autism and suicide is something you support?
I think it's lacking.
Yeah.
I don't think it covers. So I don't think it covers enough.
Okay.
I think it's too short. I think it's too lacking. And I think it, you know, if that's all we're giving people, we shouldn't. I don't want to say we shouldn't give them anything at all, but like, if that's all we're giving somebody and we're not giving them like explanations or conversations or trainings, and with that, we're doing everyone a disservice, and it means that people are going to get hurt.
When did it come out?
Even more than they already are. What?
When did it come out?
Last year sometime, like the beginning of last year, I want to say.
Yeah, we sent it out in our crisis center, but with a training that was delivered by two people who identify as autistic.
Yeah. See, I feel like that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like there's some room to grow there too. I think in crisis work in particular, I would challenge people to really, really think about sort of our reactions, our emotional reactions to the people that we're serving, because I see some pretty strong reactions from crisis workers to autistic folks on our lines, and I think it happens all the time, and there's a space where like crisis gets missed in people that are really, really searching for some support. So to me, that's like a great call to action around the crisis world, is to educate yourself and like really believe the things that we say are true, that crisis is self-defined, and that people are the best reporters of their experience, because those are common things that get said in crisis work, but I think living them is much harder. So that would be my request of the field.
Add it to the long list.
Yeah. I mean, I just have to say, like, on what you're saying that you're observing with crisis workers not responding well to autistics who are saying that they're in crisis.
Yeah.
That's absolutely a thing. Whether it's autistics having like meltdowns, or autistics just sitting there and saying, I'm in distress, I need help. But because they can present exactly what's going on, they are dismissed. And that's been my experience frequently.
Yeah. So get yourself some training, and get training from people who have had the experience, not from families and friends.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes. All right. That's all the time we got.
Okay, we're gonna bring it back though, because tech issues and all the rest.
And there's a million more things to say. Cool.
I have a hard time being succinct, so.
Oh yeah, well, same.
Yeah.
Shame you're awesome. So
Yeah.
Great. No, I'm really glad I could come on with you guys.
Yeah,
me
thank
too.
you. We'll do it again.
Yeah.
All right,
Thanks,
sounds good.
everyone, for listening.
Yeah. All right, I'm gonna end it. Bye.